So, you see those big predictions from economists and analysts all the time, right? Forecasts about GDP, inflation, where the market is headed, and you have to wonder, how do they actually come up with that stuff? It's definitely not a crystal ball. A lot of the time, the secret is in the software they use. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the classic tools in their toolkit, EViews. Let's see how it all works.
Here's the plan. First, we'll get into what EViews actually is and why it's a big deal. Then, we'll walk through getting your data set up and taking your first steps into analysis. After that, we hit the really cool part, building economic models. And to wrap it all up, we'll give our final verdict on where EViews fits in today's world.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is this thing called EViews, and why has it been a go-to for economists and financial pros for so long?
I mean, really, how do they do it? These big predictions aren't just wild guesses. They're built on some seriously complex statistical work, using massive amounts of data collected over many, many years. To get anything useful out of that, you need a specialized tool that can find the signal in all that noise.
And for a lot of people, that tool is EViews. The name, Economic Views, kind of gives it away. It was built from the ground up for econometrics, which is just a fancy way of saying applying statistics to economic data. It's especially good at looking at things that change over time, like interest rates or stock prices.
So, what's its secret sauce? Why is it still so popular after all these years? Well, it's this awesome combination of being really user-friendly, you can click through menus to do powerful stuff, while having some serious horsepower under the hood. It can chew through huge data sets, it's loaded with advanced forecasting models, and it can whip up some pretty sophisticated graphs to help you actually see what your data is telling you.
All right, enough theory. Let's get practical. Before you can do any analysis, you have to get your data into the software and get it organized. And that all happens in the EViews workspace.
Now, EViews thinks about data in three main ways. First, you've got time series. That's where you track one thing over time, like the UK's GDP every year. Then there's cross-section, where you look at a bunch of different things at the same moment in time, like the GDP of every country in Europe, but just for the year 2008. And then you've got panel data, which is the grand finale. It combines both, tracking lots of things over lots of years. You'd think getting your data in would be a huge headache, but it's actually super straightforward, especially if you're coming from something like Excel. It's basically a three-step dance. You tell it to import your file, EViews takes a look and makes some smart guesses about what it sees, you give it the nod that everything looks right, and boom! You click Finish and your work file is ready to go.
Okay, the data is loaded. This is where the real fun begins. EViews has a whole bunch of tools that let you immediately start digging in and making sense of the information you just imported.
Let's be honest, raw data is almost never ready for prime time. You usually need to clean it up a bit. EViews makes it super easy to do things like rename a ridiculously long variable name to something simple, or transform your data by taking logarithms, which, by the way, is incredibly common in economics, or even create brand new variables from the ones you already have, like calculating GDP per capita.
Of course, one of the very first things you should do is just look at your data. And with just a couple of clicks, you can turn a boring column of numbers into a graph. This is huge because it lets you spot trends, weird outliers, or interesting patterns in a heartbeat. A simple chart can tell you a story that a spreadsheet just can't.
Visuals are great, but sometimes you need the cold, hard numbers. EViews can spit out a full table of descriptive stats, your mean, median, standard deviation, all that good stuff, instantly. This is really the foundation of any serious analysis. It gives you that perfect statistical snapshot of your variables.
All right, time for the main event. We've imported our data, we've cleaned it up, we've explored it. Now let's get to the core reason EViews exists, building models to test our ideas and actually forecast the future.
So much of econometrics comes down to something called regression analysis. Now, don't let the equation on the screen freak you out. The idea is actually pretty simple. Here, we're setting up an equation to test the relationship between a country's CO2 emissions and its economic output, or GDP. That little c is just the starting point, the intercept, and EViews takes care of all that for you.
So what is that equation really asking? It's a pretty straightforward question, actually. As a country gets richer, does it start to pollute more? Or maybe less? Regression lets us put a number on that relationship and check if it's a real, statistically significant connection or just random chance.
But we all know the economy is way more complicated than that, right? You might have a sudden shock like an oil price spike that causes a short-term reaction, but you also have long-term trends like technological progress. So how on earth do you model both of those things at the same time?
Well, this is where a tool like EViews really earns its keep. It has advanced techniques like the ARDL model built right in. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful, but the concept is what's important. It lets an analyst separate the short-term shock from the long-term trend. It helps you see both the temporary bumps in the road and the direction the road is ultimately heading. It's a game changer for doing more sophisticated analysis.
So we've seen what EViews is, we've seen how it works, and we've seen the kind of power it packs. But in today's world, with all these new open-source tools like R and Python popping up, where does a classic piece of software like this actually stand?
Let's be real. There are pros and cons. On the plus side, EViews is incredibly intuitive for doing some very complex stuff. Its forecasting tools are absolutely top-notch, and it has this decades-long reputation for being reliable. But on the other side of the coin, it's paid software, it doesn't always play nice with the open-source world, and if you want to master its most advanced features, you've got a steep climb ahead of you.
So what's the final call? Is EViews a powerful, user-friendly classic that still holds its own, or is it becoming a bit of a relic in this new era of free, flexible coding languages? You know, the answer isn't that simple. For an academic researcher who needs to run a robust model quickly without writing a ton of code, it's still a giant. But for a data scientist building custom machine learning algorithms from scratch, maybe not so much. The landscape is changing, and that leaves us with a really fascinating debate about the future of the Economist Toolkit.